I'm Russell Dammers here at Parlour and Ramp, a artist-run collective in Pilsen, Chicago. Talking to Ahmed Ozsever about his exhibition and Unusable archive. You want to tell us about the show?
So the show's part of a collaborative project that's myself and Neeraja D. She's based in Bangalore, India. I work partially out of Chicago and Bloomington, Indiana. And so a lot of what we do is correspondence based. We're just bouncing things back and forth, sending things to one another, and figuring out the ways that we can communicate, which is really conducive to our work because a lot of it is about language, about communication, and about translation. We originally started working, we were in the same place at the same time. We had studios adjacent to one another. And then when she moved to India, and I moved to Chicago, and we just kind of been finding ways to keep it going ever since. One of the things we did at first was we tried the mail, and it turns out like international mail, not quite so reliable. Anyway, so we've come up with this show, and what we're looking at is various different ways to interpret found materials and relics from the past, and how when there's two different ways, kind of two different geographies for communicating, and there's a time lapse between the two people that communicate, how those things can really come together to tell a story that's either fictional or appears to be something maybe more than it actually is in terms of classification or categorization or having any kind of capital H history to it.
Yeah, interesting. I suppose it's interesting. Like you installed this show 13th of March, and it's like these ways of communication have I think they're so highlighted, and we've really as a culture been exploring them. How would you if you had to remake the exhibition now in quarantine? How different do you think the works would be?
Well, I don't. And that's a great question because we were kind of already working that way a little bit. Like we after we discovered that it was going to be very difficult to consistently mail each other things. One time I mailed her something and she received it exactly 1 year after the day that I mailed it. So it was like, this was clearly untenable. And we've used a lot of virtual means of working with things where we would actually send a file back and forth to each other and make modifications and respond to what one another were doing. Sometimes we would start with new files, bits of language, things like that. But ultimately, we would still have to convene on Google Chat and converse about whatever those things were that were having been accomplished. And the last show that we had done in 2018, we did kind of finish it together. We had done a lot of correspondence leading up to it, and then she came here and worked for 2 weeks, and we were able to make something with a physical result. And with quarantine, it's hard to say because it's kind of the physical result is just kind of on the horizon. What does that look like at this point? When are we going to see those things? So I think that's kind of what this is, exploring what that might look like. I mean, both of us are interested in technology and how that works. Neeraja actually did a really interesting piece of post-internet video that I curated into a show last year at Chicago Art Department. So knowing that kind of thing is on both of our radar, it doesn't seem outside the realm of possibility that we would make something that was designated for a screen as well. It's just not there yet.
Sure. Have you been making any art in quarantine?
Slowly but surely, yeah. It took a little bit. I got booted from my studio because my studio is on campus where I teach, and the university shut down. And then going to online teaching as well was a shift that I wasn't necessarily expecting that required a lot of work. So it was slow, but I had to think about ways to make the home studio work. And I think in the last couple of weeks, finally got that down where I like made my basement an actual, like, it's an unfinished basement that's now a little bit like, I don't know, spruced up to be a studio and still functional. So I'm able to do like some of the sculptural works that I'm working on by myself are going, but I've also dug more into the writing that I do. I've spent a lot more time working on the long process I've been going through to become a writer, but also write about my work and that I've done in the past and what I'm working on now.
Yeah, it's a interesting thing having the studio at home. I think it's a gift and a curse. I find, like, even though, yeah, I find I struggle sometimes with the studio at home, but yeah, it's definitely good to have somewhere to go to make your art.
What are your hang-ups with the home studio?
It feels too much like home. I don't know. There's something about, I don't know, I could just relax and watch Netflix. Oh, the fridge is here. What's in the fridge? You bump into a roommate. You start chatting. There's something about, having a space that you only go to do work as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I find anyway.
Have you worked alone in the past? Or like, I'm sorry, away from home?
Yeah. That's generally, I don't know, I think my last 3-4 years in Melbourne, I was at J Studios in North Fitzroy, and I had an old science lab in an old Catholic school, so they were forced to build them, and if they wanted state funding, so they had these, when the artist moved in, when no one wanted to send their kids to Catholic school anymore, there was these virgin science labs that had never been used. They had just built them. So, yeah. That was a great studio space, but eventually a dual language German school came out and offered the Catholics more money than what we could pay, so we lost the space. But yeah, so our last show in that, we had a gallery there, was called Us Fetus Fund Cunts. So yeah, it was a fun space. Yeah. So we're planning to have a closing for this show. We installed it, well, you installed it, I guess, on the 13th of March, and just before...
it was like right when the shit hit the fan.
Uh-huh.
It was like that weekend that it was like, oh, wow, this is real.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, everyone that's walked through has, who's, like, for whatever reason, through the space has, they've really loved it. They find it really resolved. Everything's very clean and sharp, and it's interesting too, trying to piece it together. It's the kind of show I kind of enjoy looking at before I read the statement, which is kind of how I like to start with work. So I want to have my own ideas and interpretation and feelings and so forth. But then reading it seems like everything sort of comes together and makes sense. So it's a solid show that we're looking forward to actually being able to show to the public. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's been kind of like friends only and occasional visitors to this point, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, hopefully that's going to happen in July. We figure we could probably do an opening in phase 4. 50 people in the space at a time. Masks and beers out the back. So, yeah.
Maybe I saw something recently out of a space in Indianapolis where one of the artists that had a studio there was doing like couture fashion masks. They were pretty extravagant.
Okay, yeah.
So who knows? Maybe there could be a mask fashion show too.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah.